About the RTI, in short, everywhere in the world, in the modern world, right to information is considered a fundamental right that strengthens democracy. It helps strengthen accountability of governance and transparency. Now, this is basically the abstract explanation of what an RTI Act is and what it means for society. It means so much for good governance, it means so much for accountability, it means so much for transparency. In Sri Lanka, for the last, say, 16, 17 years, we have been battling with successive governments to have the RTI Act in place. My first involvement was somewhere around 2000 to get the RTI Act in place. For numerous reasons, it got postponed. The governments changed. Then a new government came with a promise. And then it came to the cabinet as a draft. Then the government was changed again. It went on. Until 2014 end, when everyone was gearing up to change the regime, to get a new regime in, to push Rajapaksa out, especially the Colombo's so-called civil society activists also clubbed together with the opposition and brought some of these things into the platform as requirements for a change of government in 2015 presidential elections. RTI Act was one that was promised. So was the repeal of the PTA. Then there was the promise for improvement of the Victim Protection Act. So there are a few things that were promised on the democratic platform to make it more different to what Rajapaksa is and what the next government would be. And also the promise to have a code of ethics for MPs. And as we know, the 19th Amendment, which was promised to repeal and abolish the executive presidency, which never happened. So, but some of these things were brought to not in the same way it was promised, but nevertheless they were brought. So was the RTI Act. So this RTI Act was adopted in Parliament, and it's now called Act number 12 of 2016. And the 19th Amendment also has a clause to say that the right to information is a fundamental right. And there are also other unnecessary definitions and explanations also brought into the 19th Amendment. We would have preferred the 19th Amendment to just say that RTI is a fundamental right, and the rest to be included in the RTI Act as it is there already. Now the issue is, it is there, it's in force, it was gazetted 3rd February, it's in effect from 4th February. The first 6 months, even if there are no information officers appointed, it's in force because the head of the department, head of the institute, head of the organization will have to play the role of the information officer till an information officer is officially appointed. Now, about a month ago, almost all government ministries and departments listed their information officers, and the whole list is there in the website. If you go to the media ministry, you can get the whole list with their contact numbers. Perhaps for me, I had a small complaint about that list because that never gave the email address, nor did it give the fax numbers proper. Because according to the Act, a request can be made even verbally. Even over the phone, you can just call and say, well, under this Act, I want this information. You can even fax You can even send an email. You can send a hard copy by snail mail. How we are going to request that information is immaterial as long as you get your message across to the information officer. That's how this RTI Act is drafted and adopted. Because it takes into consideration that although we have a literacy rate of something like 94-95%, even the balance 4 to 5% who are not literate should also be able to access information, and therefore they cannot be asked to go through these formalities of making written applications for information, even on the phone. Even if they go and tell the information officer that I want this information, that has to be provided. So that's how strong and that's how flexible the RTI Act is for anyone to request information. What is not being provided under the RTI Act, like in any other country, is what is considered sensitive in terms of national security. Now, this is a very tricky thing because when there is no clear definition as to what national security is, it's a little tricky. So now there are areas that we would have to contest and see what the interpretations would be and how far they would go with this request. If they come as request that may have gray areas to be interpreted as national security. Say, for instance, if I may make a request under the RTI Act to the Defense Ministry and ask for accounts on the Laya chain of hotels, I wonder what they would say. Because the hotel, whether they are managed by the Defense Ministry, by a security regiment, or the Navy, or the Air Force, has nothing to do with national security. It's about hospitality. So I'm just wondering whether we could make a request and see how they would interpret that, because for them, it's defense. And in Sri Lanka, anything under defense has to do something with national security. So let's see how they would do. I'm planning to make a request in time to come. The fact is, now, most people have come to understand the RTI Act as a tool where the media can use to expose whatever the governments do. That's basically how people think about the RTI Act. But for me, the RTI Act is much more. But here I think I would have to stress on one important fact about the RTI Act, which makes it very different to all other acts and bills that are adopted in Parliament. Now, if you take all other acts and bills adopted in Parliament, you take the Criminal Procedure Act, you take the Industrial Law, you take the Shop and Office Act, you take any act, or you even take the Consumer Protection Act, the Child Protection Act, everything has by law a government, a state agency held responsible for its implementation. All acts, all bills have by law a state agency that is held responsible for its implementation. This is where the RTI Act differs. Although it says the Media Ministry is responsible, the implementation of the RTI Act is with the people. not with any state agency, not with any ministry, not with any authority. Even if it is the best RTI Act in the world, even if this act is ranked as number 1, if people are not going to make use of it, it has no purpose. It serves nothing. Because the RTI Act is the only act where the people can decide whether they are going to use it and for what they are going to use it and how they are going to use it. So, this can be used in very many ways. One, as usually how people think and how they come to understand, is to question the state, to question the government as to how and what they are going to do with the monies, with different policies, with different programs. All that can be checked. You can just go to any ministry, any department, any agency, and then file a request and ask for information. And that information can be used publicly. But there are also other areas that can be checked for other purposes with the RTI Act. One is for formulating programs. If any organization wants to sort of draw up a project proposal or draw up a work plan or whatever, and need information which is not easily available and may not be officially available either, then you can file an RTI application and ask for those information so that you can use it for whatever purpose you need. Draw up a program, draw up a work plan, draw up a project proposal, do up a business plan, whatever. For that type of purpose also you can use the RTI. You can also use the RTI as a research tool. Now, say if CEPA wants to do a case study or a survey on poverty in relation to public health, right, where you don't have information as regards beds per patient, as regards the distribution of specialists around the country, where you don't have much information as to where we lack in specialist doctors and where. Now these informations are not very easily available. You can't get them from the census and statistics. You can't get them from the bank, central bank reports. You may get some reports from the FISH ratings sometimes. You may get some information from the health ministry itself, from the annual report. But the easiest way to get all those data from the ground is to file RTI requests with different hospitals in different districts. You don't have to go to the ministry. Go to Ampara, file a RTI application with the Ampara district hospital and ask how many specialists they have, how many vacancies are there, how many ordinary medical doctors are there, how many trained nurses are there, how many attendants are there, what are the drugs that are in short supply, when have they been asked for, whether there was any procurement before, all those details. You can just walk into any district hospital and ask. You don't have to be a stakeholder, a beneficiary, or a victim. Just an ordinary person living in Sri Lanka, not necessarily a citizen either, can file a request and get all those details. So there are lots of areas that the RTI can be used even for surveys, research, and case studies. I've been telling this to a group there in Horana about a month ago, where they could file RTI requests with school principals, a couple of school principals, get all the details of applications, get details of those students who have been admitted to school, grade 1. And then, if you have a little bit of sociological knowledge, check whether there are caste differences, whether there are caste discrimination in school admissions, a subject that no one talks about. But it does happen. So there are lots of things that can be checked with these RTI applications. It's not necessary that you use this to sort of check the government and use it for advocacy. It can be used for advocacy, but not necessarily and not restricted to that alone. So there are lots of areas that the RTI can be used for. And also, it's not only the state sector that is being covered by the RTI Act. The RTI Act covers political parties, non-governmental organizations, and the private sector. How it is linked, how the private sector is linked, how the NGOs are linked, how the political parties are linked, and covered under the RTI Act is purely on the assumption that any organization, whether it is the private sector, the non-governmental sector, the state, if they are using public funds, they are accountable under the RTI Act. And public act does not necessarily mean money from public sources in Sri Lanka. Money that comes from a foreign government is also public funds. So if you get funds from an organization like something like Bread for the World in Germany, you're not covered under the RTI Act. But if you get funds from the GIZ, well, yes, you're covered under the RTI Act. So that's the difference. So if you get money from NORAD, you're covered. If you get money from USAID, you're covered, because that's taxpayers' money coming from a government source. It need not be the Sri Lankan government. That's how flexible and open the RTI Act is. So this is one reason why the civil society activists who were so much interested in the RTI Act during the election campaign suddenly went mute after it was drafted. So now you don't get this people who really campaign for the RTI Act talking anymore about the RTI Act. And the saddest part is that they don't even know what the RTI Act is and how to use it. Although they did awareness campaigns on the RTI Act before it was made into law. So I will not go into all those details and those organizations, not fair right now, but if you want to, we can discuss. I think I gave you a fair coverage of the RTI Act so that we could get into a discussion hereafter. Thank you.